Welcome back to History Burst, aftermath of the Civil War, freed slaves. In a previous burst, outlined were some amendments to the Constitution that protected the rights of the newly freed slaves. In the aftermath of the Civil War, that guaranteed their recognition as citizens, their right to vote, and protection from intimidation, as well as one or two other acts. So this is building upon that briefly. As always, remember you can pause the video to read a little further and then restart it to continue. So, victory in the northern states in the Civil War emancipated about 4 million slaves. So the government has to manage how to include these people in society. Freeing the slaves meant huge changes to the culture of the South, which were not popular with these many Americans. It destroyed the plantation-based economy of the South, which now struggled to operate without slave labour. Poverty became a real problem for both the freed slaves and many white former plantation owners who were struggling financially after they lost slave labour, made worse by failed crops. In the 1870s, as previously mentioned, white supremacy, the belief that white Americans were superior to everybody else, became common in the South, the Ku Klux Klan being one example of that particular prejudice. And the 1874 financial crash makes the economic problems of the South even worse. So this made the Republicans unpopular and the Democrats took over in the South again, because the Republicans are driving through the reforms that are levelling up the South with the North by freeing the slaves and banning slavery. Finally, for this small burst, this is the impact for those freed slaves. So we have a variety of impacts, some good, some not so good. And again, I would encourage you to pause the video and have a proper read through, taking away 2 or 3 pieces of evidence that will support your contextual knowledge about how the lives changed for African Americans as a result of emancipation. So politically, you have the Freedmen's Bureau set up to help provide for free slaves and poor white Southerners, but it's not particularly popular. The North are determined that the freed slaves should have the right to vote. However, it's really difficult in the day-to-day for this to be actually happening. Social changes. Huge refugee population when you think about it, 4 million freed slaves, no employment, no skills, no literacy or very limited, and violence against freed slaves is common. That the signing of a document in law is not going to change that overnight. So you see the development of black codes. So I would spend some time reading through some examples of black codes and how this radical reconstruction is not popular, hence the rise of white supremacy groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Lots of former slaves moved north looking for work in the factories. So you have the developments of slums in some of the big cities like New York and Chicago, who are trying to accommodate this influx of people. Finally, economic changes. Many believe they're entitled to land to begin with. They get given some, but they're not sure how to actually work it to a profit. White Americans are reluctant to sell to Black Americans. You still have that inherent prejudice. And as time goes on, conditions got worse. Freed slaves began to complain. Their wages weren't as good. And the fact that, employers of white persuasion are more likely to pay Black workers less. So poverty becomes a real problem. Prejudice remains inherent in society. So there are pros and cons. They are emancipated, they are free, they are recognised as equal within the law. Black Americans have the right to vote and it's protected by the law. But in a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month situation, there might be political gains, but the practicalities, it's not a whitewash of wonderfulness that happens for them. So you need to be aware of that and caution against that. Oh, now they're free and they can vote. Everything is wonderful. There is still work to be done in unifying a nation that has such inherent prejudice, discrimination, and division of the cultures in society.